Hello, I'm John Hine, Director of Compass Resolution, and today I have the pleasure and the privilege of talking to Daniel Gornall. Daniel is a chartered financial planner specializing in finances on relationship, breakdown, and divorce, working either as a financial neutral for the couple or as a shadow expert for one of the couple. Today, we'll be focusing on his role as a financial neutral. Daniel holds the Resolution Specialist Accreditation as a financial expert in divorce work, and Daniel sits on the Young Resolution National Committee. So Daniel is definitely someone worth listening to. Hi, Daniel. Good to have you with me today. Hello.
Thank you, John.
Now, Daniel and I will be spending about 30 to 40 minutes talking about the financial neutral service and support he provides to separating couples who are using mediation to reach their own financial agreements. Our hope is that by the end of this conversation, you'll have a clear understanding of this service, why it's so important, and how to work with Daniel as you go through the mediation process, significantly improving your chances of reaching a successful outcome together in the most cost-effective way. So Daniel, just before I ask my first question and get into the conversation, do you have some kind of case study or something you have in mind to provide us with some context?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got an example I can use.
Great, okay. Let's go for it. If you give us a bit of context, we'll give our viewers a bit of context for the questions we're going to be talking about.
Sure. So the purpose really for today is to explain really how I get involved in the mediation process, helping both parties as a financial neutral in reaching a fair settlement with regards to their finances. In terms of the case study, the example I was thinking involves a couple in which the wife is looking to remain in the family home, and the husband is looking to potentially retain their pensions. So really, it's just a case of kind of discussing about their preferences, about how their assets are divided, and how it might work out for both of them.
Yeah. So again, I guess the context is their prior, or as I call them, priorities and preferences. You're already picking up those words. This couple have their priorities, they've got their finances, and they've got their preferences. And your job, and my job as a mediator, is to help them kind of construct, reach outcomes, agreements that have as many of those priorities achieved and so on. Okay. So in doing that, can you give, again, our viewers, hopefully separated couples who watch this, an idea of what a financial neutral is, what your role would be generally?
Sure, absolutely. So, as a financial neutral, I would act neutrally to the process, and I would act on behalf of both parties. So there wouldn't be any favoring of one party over the other. I'd be brought in to act in the interest of both parties. And in doing so, what I would do is basically help provide financial education to the parties. It's not uncommon for one of the parties to be a bit more, or they're both even in terms of their understanding about their assets, and helping kind of identify any potential issues with regards to the division of those assets. So it's kind of about bringing together all of their financial information, reviewing that, sense checking it along the way, but ultimately with the view to just making sure that both parties are fully informed with their finances and the benefits and disadvantages of the different ways they can be split. One of the ways I can do that as well is by adopting cash flow modeling with the financial neutral work. So what that does is that brings together both parties' post-separation income, expenditure, assets, and liabilities, and then I can model and project those finances up until their assumed mortality age, really just as a way of sense checking the settlement proposals that are being discussed, and doing this for both parties to make sure that it's a fair outcome for both. And that's, the cash flow modeling is just an excellent visual way of actually sense checking all the different ways of splitting the assets and just making sure that the outcomes are fair.
So I guess essentially making sure that what they think they're getting or what they want is actually going to happen. They're kind of having to reality check, sense check, reality check, help them explore, clarify, help them understand actually in how they're to divide their assets and so on according to their priorities, but also, as you said, making sure that actually it delivers the options they're exploring, delivers what they hope it's going to deliver to meet their priorities. Yeah, okay.
Exactly, that's it.
And how does that work from a kind of mediation perspective? I know we're going to probably talk a little bit more about the process and when and timings and so on, but just for my question for me really. So I'm working with this couple, and there is this kind of typical scenario of where one focuses on the home and one focuses on wanting to retain as many pensions as possible. And I will have had, and in terms of breaking down that into stages, obviously the first stage is the gathering of the information, the data, the sufficient information for us all to be working with. So what I call the pre-mediation stage, before we get together in that joint session, before I get together. What part would you have to play there in that initial stage, would you say, in helping couples prepare to come into the first mediation session with a mediator?
Sure, yeah. So I can be brought in as early as that, before that first meeting, just to kind of help them start to collate their financial information, start thinking about the type of information they might need to get from their, say, product providers. For example, a lot of people will have built up various pensions throughout their employment. So just making sure that they contact those providers. It's not uncommon for people to forget about that everything is accounted for, and it can take a little while for pension providers to send information back. So the earlier that this requested, the better. And it's really just bringing everything together and starting to make sure that everything's valued properly for the purposes of the mediation.
Collected and understood, I guess, are the keys, really, isn't it, in terms of information? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you could be kind of guiding them, supporting them, helping them to collect and understand the information they're going to need for the purposes of trying to reach the agreement they want to reach, essentially. Yeah. Because I know a lot of
absolutely.
And we both know a lot of the cases, the solicitors kind of take on that role themselves, i.e. completing Form Es, they call them, and exchanging those and so on. But actually, what I tend to do as a mediator is I will, once I've met the couple separately, as you know, I do that, and establish what their priorities are, which we've already talked about in the house and so on, and maybe kind of considered with them, assess what some of the challenges might be psychologically, practically, and so on. I then send them these kind of financial forms, and I have worked with you before, and other financial coaches, advisors, and planners, and so on, in collecting the information. I found it's certainly the more complex or complicated cases. We're not talking about where there's one house. We might talk about where there's a portfolio of different types of assets and investments and stocks and so on. We might be talking about where there's a small business or businesses. We might be talking about, I guess, where there are maybe one or two or maybe three properties, rentals and so on, and maybe a clutch of different types of pensions. That would be quite a typical scenario I'm talking about here. So I think, in that initial stage, I think it would be very useful to work with someone like you to make sure that when they come back into mediation to work with me and look at their options and start to flesh those out, that they have the confidence and support of working with someone like you, who and therefore they're developing their own confidence and clarity as they come into mediation. So there is the practical, emotional, psychological aspects of working with you. I mean, is that how you see it as well? Is that some kind of benefits you see?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you say, at that early stage, it's just making sure the information is collected and gathered and understood. So there's lots of different types of pension schemes available, so it's making both of the parties aware of what that means to them, what income can they expect at a certain age, for example, what options they have with regards to pension sharing, should that be appropriate. But really just making sure that prior to the mediation discussions, that all the assets are fully identified and valued, because that can really help kind of the discussions, rather than just waiting for values to come through or lots of question marks over certain other areas. The more information that can be gathered prior, the more useful the discussions can be.
And I guess the outcome of that first stage of collecting what the kind of lawyers sometimes call, the legal press calls, the computation stage of collecting all the information, from mediation is an open financial summary spreadsheet with everything on it. I guess it's the matrimonial balance sheet, assets, liabilities, and I guess you have a part there to play in ensuring that before I can move on with my couple and working with you to look at options, that spreadsheet or that balance sheet is, from everyone's perspective, lawyers maybe, they're advising them, yours, mine, clients, accurate enough. Yeah. And would you have a part there to play in kind of I mean, I know I guess the answer is yes, but what part would you have to play in kind of in ensuring that objective of having an accurate enough, full and frank, open financial summary is good enough or fit for the purpose of moving to the next stage? Can you highlight any maybe challenges there might be for that, things to think about in relation to, maybe in relation to the pensions and other assets, and how you, I don't know, just a few thoughts there, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to the open financial summary, really the important metric to use is working out the net value of those assets. So what I mean by that is the value of the asset less any debts or tax. So say, for example, a rental property, like you mentioned before, it's working out, okay, so the value of that may be 500,000, but once you deduct the mortgage of 200,000 and then potential capital gains tax and cost of sale, what is the actual net value of that property? And that's the figure that we'd use when we're dividing assets, rather than the gross, before all of those expenses are deducted. So I can certainly be involved in helping the clients understand, what tax there would be to pay and what the true value of these assets might be for the purposes of division. And then with regards to pensions, like I said, because there are lots of different types, there are different valuation methods that you can use when actually valuing a pension. So say, for example, a sector defined benefit pensions. If you look at the CE value, which is the cash equivalent value that the administrators can provide, it's often not a fair valuation for putting in the balance sheet. So, for example, if a valuation was £200,000 as a CE, when you're actually looking at the open market cost of providing these benefits, it could be up to 50% greater than that. So again, part of my analysis could be actually determining a fair value for these pensions rather than just taking the cash equivalent values at face value. So that's another consideration to be made as well when dividing everything properly.
So I guess the underlying assumption we're working with here is what would be the impact of liquidating all the assets? What would be the cost of doing so? In other words, yeah, okay. And that's sometimes a little bit difficult for some couples to grasp, I found, because they might say, well, I don't plan to sell the house, but however, they need to start with that assumption of if everything's liquidated, or actually, how do you compare a pension with a cash asset and so on, the true value. Just on that kind of on that the market value or true value of the pension. Again, that's sometimes conceptually, I find can be a little challenging for some people to kind of take on board. But actually, I guess, as you said, one way of looking at it is look at what the pension provides, the benefits, and then look what it costs, whether it's a final salary defined benefits or a private pension of defined contribution, and then go to and then look at actually what would it cost to go to a pension company, pension scheme, an insurance market to buy those benefits, and then that's the true cost. That's, I think, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I get that. Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's really useful. Okay, so we've now got the couple of now working with you. Very complex case. They've got all their financial information. I have put it onto an open financial summary, and maybe I've shared that with you and the client. So we're all working, we're all aligned with the accuracy of the information. And so we now move into that kind of first mediation session, and I would then begin to explore. Well, first we'll go through the information, just check they're okay with it, any questions, and then I might shift them into thinking slightly differently, to looking at data and thinking slightly more creatively, asking them what their priorities are. What does an outcome need to achieve for each of you? Is a kind of classic kind of question to get them focused on the building blocks for their discussion, their conversation. Do you have a useful part to play in that? So I'm talking to mediators out there at the moment, and maybe clients, in exploring the stage at which we're helping the couple to explore, keep an open mind, nice flexible open mind, look at all the options that might achieve or possibly achieve some of their priorities, some of the things they want to achieve. Do you have a part to play in that, do you think?
Yeah, well, it's certainly useful to be involved in these discussions, absolutely, because for example, one might want to stay in the family home. One may wish to retain an investment portfolio because shares might have been gifted from a parent who may have passed away, so there may be an emotional attachment to that. So it's really just kind of seeing where their starting points are in terms of their preferences, and then seeing if the fair division of assets can work around these preferences and whether it is fair for both parties.
Because of course, when we think about preferences and we think about values, things of value, often people think just in terms of money. Actually, it might be something of value to someone, or valuable to something, could be valuable to them, because you say it's emotional value, and therefore that enables them to be more flexible and creative with their constructing solutions, because it may not just be the financial figures of 50-50, but it may be actually I put more value on, I don't know, having my horse than I do have him having his Jaguar, or whatever it might be, and so on. No, okay, I get that, yeah. And actually, I find it can also, just addressing now the couple out there, I find it's often useful working with a financial expert like yourself, because they can sometimes defer to you a little bit and say, okay, you're not working for either of us, you're working for both of us, you're neutral, and therefore tell us what that might look like. What do we need to be thinking about if we go down that route? Reality tests and so on, our preferences. No, okay, I can see that. Definitely having you on the team in the moment, exploring in that, having that collective reasoned conversation around all the options. No, okay, and then we kind of move on, and then we may be now in the second or third session. Is there anything, with that case study you had in mind? Sometimes I finish a session with a couple, I immediately think with them, okay, what do we need to be thinking about, couple and me, before you come back to the next session, and to start to narrow the options and start to kind of get some traction on what a good outcome might look like. I think in pensions particularly, I don't know, can you give me examples where they might have to go off and work maybe with another expert, or someone else that you may be able to help them with to do? So like a kind of liaison or facilitator as well yourself.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, when reviewing the financial information, yeah, like you say, potentially identifying other experts that need to be involved is quite important. So if there's a business, for example, that needs to be valued and there's no independent valuation, it may be worth getting a forensic accountant to get that valuation. If there's complicated tax involved, a tax expert could be brought in just to make sure that that's correctly computed. But then also, a pension expert. So like I said before, if you have a complex scheme like an NHS pension or an armed forces pension, especially, even if you've been a member of the scheme for 30 years, you've probably been involved in different sections of this along the way. It can add to the complexity. So really, unfortunately, it's not as easy as just adding up the cash equivalent values and dividing them by 2, because there's a lot more that kind of goes into working out what a fair division would be. So often it's appropriate to instruct a pension expert to produce a report which would look at the pensions in isolation and determine what would be a fair way of splitting them to make sure that there's equality. And often they'd calculate that based on equality of income as opposed to the equality of the capital values, just to make sure that both parties are in the same position in retirement, achieving the same amount of income. And because of the income being the fairest metric of division, expert calculations are required. And like I said, it's unfortunately not as easy as just adding them up all together or applying the 50-50 split to everything.
If only, eh? If only.
Sure.
So as I'm visualizing it, I'm working with the couple in the mediation. I'm the kind of facilitating the solution-focused conversation and so on. And you might now be, and my question there as I'm listening to you, so could you provide them with support outside the mediation sessions to liaise with and help them instruct and work with these particular experts, such as the forensic accountant or the pension expert and so on? I see you nodding, and therefore providing a bit more. I'm thinking of the whole process, providing that kind of that glue, that cohesion, that integration, maybe that the whole process might require. They might require. Is that something that you see yourself doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I work with clients, I can either work with them in the capacity of helping guide them to obtain the information they require. Alternatively, I could get them to complete letters of authority where I can obtain the information on their behalf. And then when the information comes back, knowing what to do with that in terms of making sure it's reflected appropriately in the spreadsheet. And then with regards to pensions, if it's appropriate to instruct a pension expert, well, I can help identify whether it is or not in the first instance. And if it is appropriate to instruct an expert, to kind of help them with what instructions might be suitable for them in terms of whether it's best to calculate equality of income or capital or determine an offsetting figure. So what I mean by that is, if pension sharing isn't to happen, what would be a fair amount of non-pension capital to offset the pension being retained? And then once that expert report comes back, often it can be difficult to interpret. So it's making sure both parties understand what that pension report is saying and explaining in simple terms what it means to them.
So important. I know many pension experts, actuaries, and so on, are not that keen on coming actually into mediation to do that. They're very happy to sit
Sure.
at the desk and do the reports. So actually, that can be a very useful service. And what about the forensic accountant? Where do you see yourself working, being helpful there? If a forensic
Sure.
accountant.
Again,
Hmm.
Extra professionals, just to give them a background to basically what the instructions would be, and then again, working with them to interpret what those findings mean to the parties in mediation. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet is just obviously making sure that all parties are copied into all correspondence as we go, just to make sure that everyone's informed about what's going on and no one's being left out of the communication.
Yeah, that's really important, and that comes, I think, in my head under the protocols or the principles of the process, which is, of course, yes, everyone, transparency, because don't forget, you're working as a neutral, this couple are working together, I'm helping them work together there, so we keep them in the decision-making seats. Now, we haven't talked about that particularly, about the process, but that's the purpose, really, of what we're trying to do, isn't it? So many other processes, of course, we know, private FDRs, arbitration, neutral about, it's all about shifting the decision and shifting the power to others to make decisions for this couple. The challenge in the process we're talking about, mediation and so on, is actually about how can we support couples to stay in the driving seat, stay empowered, confident, understand, so they can make their own decisions. Just to remind you viewers out there, that's obviously what we're talking about here, which is the kind of the team approach, if you like. Okay, that's really useful. So in my head, we're in mediation still. We've kind of got to the second, possibly the third session, and they're kind of ready now to start making decisions, start to kind of reach some proposals, as we said, in mediation or agreements. And they've done that. They've narrowed it. This couple have pretty much got an agreement. I've taken them through pretty much a checklist, maybe a legal checklist. Have they considered all the legal aspects as well, perspectives? And they may have solicitors supporting them. They've got you at neutral. They've got me, the facilitator. And then they have solicitors supporting them, going backwards and forwards to kind of give them some confidence in the law and so on. Now we're now in the implementation stage. So they've got their agreement. They're going to they're either going to ask me to draft the order, which I do very occasionally. I prefer lawyers to do that, and they ask lawyers to draft the order, and they're implementing their agreement, which means maybe the pension share, maybe a transfer of shareholding businesses, it might be, and so on. Again, you know what I'm going to ask. I guess, do you have a useful role as financial neutral to play in supporting them in that kind of that stage of the whole process, the implementation of the agreements and decisions that they've made?
Sure. So, I mean, if both parties agree, then potentially I could help with implementation, but often is the case that due to worries about conflict of interest, I'm usually separate to that process, but I can refer to another independent financial advisor to help implement that if required.
No, that's a useful point, actually. There is this kind of, again, some of the subtleties of the whole process, this conflict of interest you mentioned. We need to all remember what roles we're in, don't we? So as for example, as a mediator, the role I'm in is as neutral facilitator. I can give loads of information, legal information, but I can't advise. There's a whole conversation, the difference between advice and information, but I won't go there. You'll be if you're on a neutral role, then of course you have to be very careful about not slotting into acting for one of them or representing one of them in terms of investments and so on. So yeah, it's about, isn't it, when especially as a team,
Exactly.
remembering what our overriding objective is to help couples to work together to make their own decisions. And therefore, if that is the objective, the purpose, which everyone buys into, then it's what can you do within your specific role. Today, we're talking about as a financial neutral to support and help this couple to meet the challenges of the process, financial challenges, what can I do, and so on. And therefore, we're starting to kind of think about the team problem-solving process. What do you see as the benefits of that way of working? I mean, in your mind, and the benefits of this team approach?
Well, I mean, no one of us are experts at everything, so it's really just making sure that you get the right professional to deal with the right elements. So, I'm a expert when it comes to finances on divorce, but I'm not a tax expert. So whilst I have a basic understanding of the taxes involved, if there's anything more complex, then it's certainly appropriate to bring in a professional with regards to that. And again, with business valuations, I have absolutely no idea how to value businesses and all the other intricacies that go into working out what a fair value would be. So again, it's just making sure you have the right professional doing the right job.
Right professional, right job, employed at the right time in the most cost-effective, efficient way. Isn't that kind of what I'm calling teaming? The idea of creating the right team around the challenge and so on.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think we're kind of how are we doing for time? We're doing really well. I mean, we're kind of coming to an end. So as we do come to an end, and let's say I'm now working with a couple, and we're looking to get you involved, get you engaged, because I think it would be well worth their while to do so. By the way, they can contact you obviously on the Compass Resolution website, on the team page and so on. But how can they contact you directly if they wanted to get hold of you through your website, through your details? How would they do that?
Yep, so I work for a company called Centurion Chartered Financial Planners. So if you do a quick Google search, you'll find us at the top of the results there. Alternatively, you can find me on LinkedIn, Daniel Gornall at Centurion. That's a good way of contacting me. But in terms of instruction, I'm always happy to have an initial meeting with the parties free of charge, just as a means of just getting a good background to their situation and be able to help them with that. And then in terms of costs, it's difficult to know because each case is different. But what I do is once I work out the complexity of the work involved and the scope of work that's being asked of me, I could put together a fee agreement which sets out my fixed fee for helping the parties through mediation.
That's really useful, having a fixed fee. I think that we're moving more and more into that realms of fixed fees and so on, so clients know what they're. Okay, and just thinking of the mediation, just as we pull this to an end. So as I hear it, you're offering us this kind of scoping meeting, a joint, maybe on Zoom or online, and so from that, that will give you an idea of how of putting together a cost structure. Within the mediation process, at what point would it be most useful, do you think, to I know it's difficult, course to course, different contexts and so on. But I guess the earlier the better to bring you into that kind of scoping meeting, that kind of if we're thinking working with you, a meeting with the couple, me and you, to introduce you and to talk about how you work and how you can help them. Would that be useful?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I tend to say is if you think you'll need some sort of assistance with the finances at some point, then it's good to get me involved as soon as possible, just as a way, and then I can kind of help work with you to determine where I can be useful and the point at which I could be instructed to help the process.
That's brilliant. No, thank you. Well, that's all clear to me, very clear all out to me. I'm hoping it's this has been a really useful chat for those looking at going through separation, divorce, and looking through mediation and sorting out the finances. And I hope they conclude, as I do and have found anyway from experience, that using you has been a very useful experience. But incredibly important and very useful indeed. So thank you. Thanks very much for your time, Daniel. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, your information with us and experiences. And if anyone out there looking to work with Daniel, I recommend you do so. You'll know where to find him. He works for Centurion. You'll also find him on our website. So once again, thank you very much for your time, Daniel. Thanks for meeting.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.